Welcome to New York, Quebec, and the water route to the center of the world. This is bonus episode 13. I left my leg in St. Maarten, a tale of Peter Stuyvesant and the Dutch Caribbean. St. Maarten is one of the smallest land areas on Earth that is divided between two nations. The Dutch control around 40% of the landmass, and the French control the other 60%. This strange arrangement dates back to the first half of the 17th century, when both nations allied in their struggle to expel the Spanish from the island during the 80 Years' War. Though still powerful in the Greater Antilles, the Lesser Antilles were sparsely settled by the Spanish. Encroachment from Barbados and the southern Windward Islands gravitated toward St. Martin's central location at the top of the Leeward Islands and east of Puerto Rico. Philipsburg is the capital city and chief port of the modern Dutch half of the island and served the role of primary colonial port in the 17th century. Fort Amsterdam was constructed in 1631 to protect Dutch claims and was the first major fortification constructed by the Netherlands in the Caribbean. It was captured by the Spanish 2 years later, as the fort dominated the harbor sitting on a long hilly peninsula that controlled the western opening of the bay. The Spanish poured money into improving the fort's defenses over the next 15 years, as its geographic importance grew to rival El Morro in San Juan in terms of strength. Dutch and French forces successfully banded together to drive the Spanish out by the mid-1630s, but the Spanish crown reinforced its presence with 1,000 troops in 1638. The construction continued in earnest from this point forward at the site of Fort Amsterdam. By 1644, Spanish forces had been stripped from the island to fill more important fronts, and the Dutch West India Company decided to launch an attempt to retake the island. Peter Stuyvesant, of later New Amsterdam fame, was given the task of leading a strike force from the Dutch base of Curaçao. I want to take a quick moment to link Curaçao to the larger New World Dutch polity. This island would have been connected to the sister colony of New Netherlands in every manner, eventually assuming the mantle as administrative and military capital of the Dutch Empire in the New World. Both Dutch Brazil and New Amsterdam originally held that title but fell to outside conquerors. The economic links are incredibly strong, and this is even more so apparent in the shared contraband trade and freeport status. Usually horses went in the opposite direction later, but the wild descendants of Spanish origin were in high demand in New Netherlands. The horses of Curaçao became a target for Spanish military authorities in an attempt to quash this trade in important societal assets that would strengthen the Dutch. By 1652, a Sephardic Iberian refugee turned Dutch merchant started trading horses from Curaçao to New Netherlands. João de Ilan traded in these hardy horses placed on the island over 100 years ago by passing Spanish shipping. These horses were prized on the grain plantations like those of the Phillips manorial lands. Family matriarch Margaret Hardenbrock made sure to establish ties early on with the island. This trade angered Dutch officials on Curaçao and in New Netherlands. Requests came from Peter Stuyvesant, who administered both North American and Caribbean Dutch possessions, to receive permission to expel the Jewish traders. WIC stocks were owned by a considerable amount of Jewish merchants residing in Amsterdam, and they intervened to have the WIC reject the petition of expulsion. Let's return to Stuyvesant, who had around 600 soldiers and sailors in 8 warships when he arrived off of Philipsburg on March 20th, 1644. In another sign of international cooperation, the Dutch flotilla had stopped at St. Kitts to pick up both French and English volunteers, being a shared geographic space at a time of great global conflict as well. The Spanish defenders only maintained a contingent of around 120 soldiers, manning the significant fortifications. The siege got off to a promising start, as the Dutch were able to set up a battery on the heights overlooking the fort. After initiating a successful bombardment, tragedy struck the expeditionary force as a lucky Spanish cannonball careened off the deck, and the deflection shattered Peter Stuyvesant's leg. The wound was so serious that the leg was amputated, and the legendary cankerous legend of the peg-legged Governor-General was born. Unfortunately, the Dutch force was left without an able commander and failed to press its advantage. A nighttime attack was foiled several days later, and the arrival of a Spanish resupply flotilla sapped any remaining Dutch morale. By early April, the Dutch destroyed their siege lines and sailed back to their base on Curaçao. The Spanish would occupy the island for 4 more years until 1648, when the Peace of Westphalia was signed. the island was vacated by the Spanish and left to both the French and Dutch to divide amongst themselves. The Treaty of Concordia was signed in the same year, and this saw the island divided in its current form. Legend has it that a single French and Dutch inhabitant were chosen to walk the island's western shore. Starting from a northern and southern position, each colonist walked toward the center of the island. At the point at which their paths crossed, a horizontal line was drawn across the island. Today, one can travel freely between both sides of the island without customs duties or checkpoints. Thanks for listening to New York, Quebec, and the water route to the center of the world.